Hello, everyone. So first of all, thank you for being here today. And today we have the pleasure of having with us for another lecture with the Italian program, World Cinema and Women and Gender Studies. We are going to have a conversation with filmmaker and literary critic Brian Alessandro, whose work is mainly about contemporary theory, queer studies, and film. Brian Alessandro has written in Warhol's interview, Newsday, The Huffington Post, and his publications include a very recent book with the title Fever Spores, The Queer Reclamation of William S. Burroughs, and an adaptation into a graphic novel of Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story that is forthcoming this December for Top Shelf Production. Brian Alessandro is also a filmmaker. He has directed the feature film Afghan Hound that is available on Amazon, on Tubi, and Plex. He has also founded the literary journal The New Engagement. He hosts regularly live interviews with artists, writers, and filmmakers for the Queens Public Library's Culture Connection, and has interviewed twice Fran Lebowitz, David Cronenberg, Lisa Immordino-Vreeland, and Leslie Frowick, founder and director of the Halston Personal Archives, among many of the people that he has interviewed. So, Brian, I am very happy to welcome you today. It is really a great pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Victoria.
To hear your story, about your work and everything that you do. So would you like me, as you start talking about yourself and what you do, would you like me to launch the PowerPoint?
Sure, thank you. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, hello everyone, and thank you, Victoria. It's a real honor to be here. And once Victoria starts the PowerPoint presentation, I'll start by discussing my literature and art journal, The New Engagement.
Absolutely. Okay. There we go.
Great.
Just 1 second. I would like to check. Sorry, I have to stop briefly the share. Okay.
Sure, it's okay.
I just have to make sure that there is a pin here. Yes. Okay, done. So I'm going to move back to the screen share. Sorry.
Sure.
Excellent. Brian, please.
Great. So if you could just advance it to the New Engagement, Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's the first page after this one. Great.
Yes.
So the New Engagement, thank you so much. The New Engagement is a literature and art journal that I launched in July of 2016 with Lupe Rodarte, a good friend. We've published 18 digital issues and 2 print issues. The journal covers everything from novel excerpts to short stories, to essays, to photography, to short films, to paintings, to illustrations. We've had Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, writers and artists from at least 25 states and a dozen countries, including Richard Howard, Edmund White, Tyree Day, Merzban Shroff, Seamus Scanlon, Alden Jones, Paula Sicki, Christopher Bolin, Michael Carroll, Felice Niels, Alexander Remnick, Nadia Abrashi, Eric Dean Wilson, and many others. It's something that I'm very proud of. And, you know, we launched it during a very tumultuous political period in the United States. And it was Lupe, it was mine and Lupe's hope to create a space for people who were particularly at the margins, people of color, people in the LGBTQI community, to feel like they had a platform and a voice to push back against some of the frightening conservative, juggernauts that were steamrolling our way. Do you have any questions about this, Victoria, or should we advance to the next section?
Well, I think that it is a brilliant idea to have brought to the attention of the audience this journal, the new engagement. And so I'm really looking forward to learning more about it as well.
Thank you. And I should say that we are on an extended hiatus right now because I've gotten very busy with a lot of other projects. So I haven't been able to put out a new issue since the summer of 2020. So these 2 print issues and 18 digital issues were all released, from 2016 to 2020, and nothing's been done since then. But I do intend to get back to it sooner than later, hopefully, if I could find the time.
Definitely. It seems that this is a long-term project with
Yes.
a lot of interest, and the potential is also quite high, considering that there is always a need for very progressive values that include also theory and film.
Yes, absolutely. It's a conversation. We like to think of it as an ongoing conversation.
Absolutely. Do you want me to move forward?
Oh, yes, please. So I also wrote and directed a feature film called Afghan Hound. I was actually commissioned to write this story in the fall of 2009 by a film producer. I went ahead and wrote it and then directed it, and it was done by January 2011. But only in the last year did it get distribution on Amazon, Plex, and Tubi. It's about an American Marine and an Afghan orphan who begin a friendship and discover disturbing things about each other's past. The film explores American exceptionalism, war, bigotry, PTSD, and healing. It co-stars Matt McGorry from Orange is the New Black and How to Get Away with Murder, and Rushi Kota of Never Have I Ever and Grey's Anatomy. It's screened at the Left Forum, the Institute for Contemporary Psychotherapy. It's something I'm very proud of. It was very difficult to make. I always tell everybody it was probably the most difficult, but also the most exhilarating and rewarding thing I've ever done. I'm so accustomed to writing novels and essays, and you have complete control when you write. But when you're making a film and you have to work with 25 cast members and 30 crew members every day and communicate your vision and your point of view and ideas well enough for them to understand it, so that they could help you actualize what's in your head, it's a completely different ballgame. And the great Stanley Kubrick once said, writing a novel, making a film is sort of like writing a novel while on a roller coaster. And and I think that that's a very apt description. And maybe you could play the trailer for the film, Victoria?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't think there's any sound. So we were able to see it, but maybe not hear it. I think there was a technical glitch with the sound, but
Yes.
you could look it up on YouTube. There's 2 versions of the trailer on YouTube. Do you have any questions pertaining to the film that you wanted to discuss, Victoria?
Yes, of course. I wanted to ask this question about the film. It seems to me that this film is very heavy in the operatic influences because many times the camera witnesses to these dialogues between the veteran and the victim of the oppression, so to speak. This seems to be the stage personae that take place like in the drama, but it seems that this is more like an operatic structure in the sense that it filmed like an opera, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually
Two people on stage on the camera, and the
Yep.
camera movement is basically pretty limited because
Yes.
there's always a dialogue captured in the same shot.
We actually, the notes that I kept giving the actors and my cinematographer and the art director was that I really want to have most of the shots locked down. So one master shot without too much camera movement. I did this for a few reasons. I'm a big fan of Pier Paolo Pasolini, and I'm also a big fan of Michael Haneke, the Austrian filmmaker. And they tend to do this because they want to try to do it. I think they want to allow the audience to feel that they are in the scene with the actors, that they lose themselves. And after a while, it does start to have that effect on the viewer without multiple cutaways, the sort of, quick cutting MTV style that American filmmakers are so fond of. The European filmmakers, I find, are more comfortable with just locking the camera down on a master and leaving it for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with no cutaways. And it does create like an operatic or theatrical quality, and you feel the scene feels lived in, and you start to lose a sense of you're watching a movie. I find that has a spellbinding effect. You actually gave me a very nice compliment recently. You compared it to La Strada, Fellini's La Strada.
Yes,
I thought that was great.
definitely.
Fellini's theatricality was not necessarily in my mind when I was working on the film, but in hindsight, I could see how I might have been influenced, maybe unconsciously by his work.
I really found it interesting because it was like the third character was missing, because in La Strada there are 3 characters. So it seemed to me that the young man who is personifying all the trauma of the war in reality unites the characters of both the fool and Zampano in one.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. That's great. That's a really, I
not
think,
that
great
the
observation.
American soldier would be the Gelsomina type, but in many ways the revelations that he's going through his own life, like someone who's always lived by default, and then suddenly he is forced into a retrospection for which he has no therapy or no training in his own life, having lived on the surface most of his life. I really found that the film was brilliant.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And as I said, it's available for free with commercials on Plex and Tubi. And I think you could rent it on Amazon. I don't know how much. I think it's a few dollars, but there's no commercials. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry because I think that I accidentally closed the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go back to it.
No problem.
So here is the PowerPoint. And let me just minimize this window so that I can go back to, okay. So we were at Afghan Hound.
Right. And you could advance it. Oh, great. Thank you so much. And you could advance it to the novel if you like, to the Unmentionable Mann.
Okay, sure.
So I also wrote yeah, that's great. Thank you. Cairn Press, a small micro publisher in Tucson, published this novel, my first novel, The Unmentionable Mann, in the fall of 2015. It's about a family of wealthy white supremacists who self-destruct when they discover that the heir to their family name is both gay and in love with an Indian boy. So you can, someone who's a patrician family that's so ruled by bigotries, sort of self-immolate when they realize that the person who's inheriting the family name and the fortune is standing diametrically opposed to everything that they've always believed in. The novel explores racism, classism, homophobia, guilt. I was very lucky to get blurbs by Daniel Dreyfus, who's an Academy Award nominated filmmaker. He actually has a movie on Netflix right now, All Quiet on the Western Front. Very popular. I think it's #1 in the world. He produced that, so it was a great honor to have received a blurb from him. Jonathan Coet, the great filmmaker of Tarnation. Charles Flowers, who's the poet laureate of West Hollywood and the publisher of Bloom, and it was reviewed well in the Huffington Post. So it was a nice reception. I had worked on it on and off for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years. Did you have any questions about this book?
Not particularly, and it seems that this is another very universal story,
Yeah,
especially from Western societies where everything considered to be different appears always to be like quite a surprise.
I think that's the theme. Those are the themes I keep going back to. Is this sort of I like to write about, entitlement and a false sense of supremacy or sovereignty. And I like to look at this through so many different lenses, whether it's war or imperialism or homophobia or classism or racism. I like to try to get into the minds of people who feel like they are superior to others, because it's such a fantasy. And Fran Lebowitz, we spoke about her a bit ago.
Yes.
She's the one who once said, racism is really a fantasy. It's a warped, demented perception held by people who are deluded. And I'm fascinated and disturbed by it. So I think I keep writing about these types of people. Narcissism is a big part of that too. I'm fascinated by narcissism. And this is probably because of my background is in clinical psychology. So I'm always trying to figure things out. And I feel like my projects are more like dissections. My films and books and articles are kind of like dissections, trying to psychoanalyze a situation or a topic.
Well, it seems that the point of writing and of filmmaking is also meaning making, so creating connections in a universe that is disconnected and trying
Yeah.
to find also a background to our stories.
Yes, absolutely. I guess you could advance it to the next one. So I'm very proud of this project. This is a novel I've been working on since
Beautiful cover.
Thank you. It's by Igor Karash, who's a really brilliant artist. He actually illustrated the Boy's Own Story graphic novel, and we became friends because we spent 5 years working on that project together. So, when I asked him to do the cover for me and he said yes, I was elated because he's really just a marvelous artist. So, this story is about a character named Risk Bonaventura. He's a successful but very insecure investment banker. He moves his family from New York to Madrid to buy his way into bullfighting. This was a childhood dream meant to edify his ego. It's, of course, totally ludicrous because the character is in his late 40s. He has no experience with bullfighting, but in his mind, toxic masculinity being what it is, he believes that this is like the ultimate show of bravado and manhood. So he buys his way into bullfighting, and of course it's disastrous, and he's struck by his conscience and left seriously injured by the bull. And then his wife Lorna, who's based in part on Camille Paglia, and Javier, a Spanish matador, whom he envies and also obsesses over, they start this very complex threesome, this relationship. And the story is really a meditation on beauty and disfigurement, arrogance, as I said, toxic masculinity, the power of the feminine, and the new lords, as I call it, of cancel culture and political correctness. And it also looks at the son's queer video artist son, Theo, who engages in spite work behind the scenes. This will be published by Rebel Satori Press in April of 2023, so it's not out yet. And I was very lucky to get blurbs by Pulitzer Prize winners Diane Seuss, who just won the Pulitzer for poetry this year, and Junot Diaz, who wrote The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. He won a Pulitzer too. Edmund White, Garrett Conley, Manuel Munoz, Iris Smiles, and there was also a chapter reading by the great Eduardo Ballerini. So I'm very excited about this. I just learned also that the book's editor of The Atlantic will be interviewing me in April for Culture Connection to discuss it. And again, like Afghan Hound and the Unmentionable Mann, I'm still looking at delusion and what delusion and insecurity can do to people. In this case, a whole family. So the first half takes place in New York. The second half takes place in Madrid.
Well, the title is very interesting because this idea of performing and is also closely connected to performing a public persona or like a public image. That was my idea behind is my current idea behind my work on Fran Lebowitz. So the idea of having a public mask or a persona is closely connected to this idea that comes, needless to say, from Butler. And so it
Yes.
is all very interesting. So I wish you the very best for this novel.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to share it with everybody. I started working on it in the summer of 2017. So, you
Mhm.
know, all these projects take anywhere from like 3 to 5 years. It's just, it takes as long as it takes. You know, you want to get it right, so you take your time with it.
Absolutely.
You could advance to the next one. Thank you. So Pank is a really great literary journal that was founded by Roxane Gay, the
Mhm.
writer and feminist, in 2006. They published 3 of my short stories. One is called Please, and that was in issue number 15. The other one is called Saint Lorna, and that was published in the fall of 2019 in a digital issue. And then Julia Kay and Others was published in their newest issue, number 16 and 17, which was a double issue, and that was released this past spring. And Saint Lorna is actually an excerpt from Performer Non Grata. So I already had that. I had the novel excerpt years before it was even done, which
Well,
is
that's
kind of,
wonderful that you got to work with Roxane Gay. She's actually gaining quite a momentum
she
at the
is.
moment.
I didn't
She's
actually get
very
to work.
talented.
She's so talented and she's really becoming quite a star, which is, you know, I think rightly so. But I didn't get to work with her. I worked with editor called, his name is Christopher Campagnoni. So
Mhm.
he's the editor of Pank, but she founded it.
Absolutely.
Um, so Interview Magazine, yeah, I've written about a dozen reviews and interviews for both Newsday, which is one of the 10 most read newspapers in the country. It's based on Long Island, and also Interview Magazine, of course. And I pulled a few of the covers of my stories, and I'll go through each one of those separately in a moment. I was also the judge of the 2022 Lambda Literary, the Lammies, contest for best memoir. We had to read 63 submissions in a 3-month period. So 63 memoirs in 3 months to choose the top 10 and then the top 5 and then ultimately the winner. So that was, you know, quite an undertaking. Um, I've also had critical essays published in anthologies about filmmakers and writers, such as Edmund White was published. My essay about adapting his novel, A Boy's Own Story, into a graphic novel was published in an anthology called Crashing Cathedrals. And then my article, my essay about David Cronenberg's 1969 film, his first feature, Stereo, was published this past spring in an anthology called Children of the New Flesh. I also interviewed Cronenberg for that publication, so I got to speak with him twice, which was a great thrill for me. It's such a huge fan. I've also conducted interviews, like I said, with various actors and playwrights and writers for Interview Magazine. Interview, I don't know if you all know, was founded by Andy Warhol in 1969. So I guess before we discuss this, Victoria, could you advance to the next slide so I could start to sort of summarize each one? So I was interviewed myself by the editor of Interview this past June in discussion about fever spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs, and the state of the LGBTQI community in 2022. Fever Spores is an anthology of appreciations of essays about the great beat writer William S. Burroughs. Our goal, my co-writer, my co-editor is Tom Cardamone. He and I said, listen, this story, the backstory is actually very interesting. I published an essay about Burroughs by Tom in the New Engagement, my journal, and said, I love Burroughs so much, and I feel like the gay canon doesn't really include him. He's almost been sort of left out. And he said, yeah, you know, I agree with you, and we should really work on a book together that sort of seeks to reclaim him into the gay canon, into the gay literary community. And so we did. We were able to get 25 submissions from various writers, which we'll talk about in a moment, actually. I don't want to jump too far ahead. So you could advance to the next one. Hillary Burton Morgan, you know, she was in White Collar, One Tree Hill, The Walking Dead. She has a podcast now called Drama Queens. I interviewed her about a year and a half ago. We spoke about social justice, COVID-19, and her 20-year career on television. And you could advance the next one. Edouard Louis is a great young French writer. He's kind of a major celebrity in France. And he's still very young. I think he's barely 30, and he's already had 4 bestsellers published. I spoke with him about France, about abuse, about childhood trauma, politics, and memoir writing. All 4 of his books are memoirs. You could advance it. And then, of course, Fran Lebowitz. I had a discussion with writer, wit, and cultural critic Fran Lebowitz about literature, cinema, writing, New York City, culture, and insomnia. She famously doesn't sleep very well. This was actually how you found me, right, Victoria? You had referenced.
Absolutely, through the article from Interview, and then with the other one, and needless to say, you are in both bibliographies for both articles. So,
Right. Yeah, that was a great honor. I was really appreciative to be included in your fantastic work.
oh, thank you
Um,
so much. I was very interested in your approach to interviewing people because it is really very difficult, in my opinion, to find the right rhythm with each person that you interview. And it seemed that you really engage in quite a lively conversation with Fran Lebowitz. And I also liked the narrative tone that you had to introduce the questions. For instance, that you were traveling in Japan, I believe, or in Asia in
China.
general, like in
Yeah.
the area, no, Japan, and that you had Metropolitan Life with you, and that was really great companion. And she answered, well, I'm glad that I was able to contribute to your solving such important issues in life.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in China for work for 2.5 months in the spring of 2011, and I was homesick. And I had copies of Metropolitan Life and Social Studies with me, and I was reading them. And I told her that they gave me some solace, and she said, "I'm so happy I could help with these international problems."
Absolutely. See, and you narrate the entire ordeal of things so much better than I do. So there is really the tone of the writer here. This is what
Uh,
I would say.
it was so great. And as you noticed, it was published on January 19th. That was my birthday. So that was a
Mhm.
great gift from Interview Magazine to have this article published on my birthday.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I noticed that her Warhol picture, so to speak, of her being reproduced 3, 4 times across the picture is really taking hold in our iconography of Fran Lebowitz.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah, it's great. And this was something that, Interview Magazine did. They love her because, that's where she got her start.
absolutely.
She got her start writing reviews of bad movies called The Best of the Worst. That was her
Mhm.
column. So this was back in the early 70s, right? 1970, I believe. It was before
Absolutely.
before her 2 books. I love Fran though. Yeah, I love
The
talking to
AIP
her.
films,
Yeah.
American International Pictures, definitely.
And I guess you could advance it, Victoria. So we were speaking about fever sports, and it looks like I don't know if everybody can see. Oh, I guess they can just move it because that's a drawing I did. I'm also an illustrator, and I was working with a literary agent at the time, and he said you should illustrate because he saw the cover. So this is the cover of Fever Spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs, the anthology I was speaking about earlier that I co-edited. I drew this picture of William S. Burroughs and posted it on social media, and the publisher of Rebel Satori Press, Sven Davison, happened to see it and said it would be great for the cover of the book. And I said, yeah, sure. And so he ended up using it as the cover of the book. And then, the agent I was working with at the time said, you should draw a portrait of Fran Lebowitz. And so I did. And that's there on the other side. So the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs' Fever Spores, as I said earlier, I worked with Tom Cardamone on it, and it features 25 original essays and 7 interviews with Fran Lebowitz, David Cronenberg, Blondie, Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, Samuel R. Delany, who's been writing science fiction since the early 60s, Legs McNeil, who is the founder of Punk Magazine and the editor-in-chief of Spin Magazine. I think he also founded Nerve Magazine, and then Chris Kelso, a great Scottish writer. It was really well reviewed it was really well featured in Interview Magazine and Newsday, Long Island Advance, Culture Connection, and most recently in the Gay and Lesbian Review. And just to show you the power of a single review, the book came
Yes.
out last June. And so it did really well in sales, but then as it happens, after a couple of months, it starts to drop off, right? So
Mhm.
on Amazon, I think it dropped down to like 180. And then the Gay and Lesbian Review review was published last week, and it jumped all the way up to 40.
Well, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, just one review
Congratulations.
six months later, after we thought that, its life was coming to an end, it ended up with this 11th hour surge because of one review. So I'm very grateful to the Gay and Lesbian Review for helping us with sales. Yeah, and so this actually happened very quickly. We started talking, Tom and I started talking about this in the fall of 2020, and it was published in June of 2022. So not even 2 years. We were able to wrangle all these great writers and filmmakers to sound off about Burroughs. And we came to this conclusion that, maybe Burroughs was not included into the gay literary canon because he's not polite or he's not grateful. Now in the current culture, and I made this sort of controversial point when I spoke with Interview Magazine, that we so badly want to be included and accepted into the mainstream that we're always on our best behavior as gay people, as gay writers. We're always afraid of offending or being excluded. But Burroughs didn't really care about any of that. He said, I don't really need to be accepted into the mainstream. I am who I am. I don't believe in most of your bourgeois philosophies. And if you don't like it, you can take it or leave it. I think that a lot of contemporary gay writers are a little bit afraid of that, of being scolded or excluded or vilified. And I understand why that's happening. It's because of, this sort of very frightening and crazy politics that we're experiencing right now in this country. We almost don't want to give, certain politicians any more ammunition against us. But I think I'm very much of the same mind as Burroughs. I like to provoke. and
Absolutely.
I like to start
Although
a difficult conversation.
you have a great point there.
In which regard?
In regards to the politeness,
Oh, yeah.
you certainly have a great point. Although maybe it's also, if I can add a possible question to this, do you think that it's possibly also the air of the times, or as they say in French, l'esprit du temps, meaning the fact that there isn't the same commitment to reading, to literature, like in general, because I can think of many other writers who were publicly, sorry,
Hmm?
who were completely openly gay, like, Truman Capote or others who were not necessarily the most polite people out there. Tennessee
Yeah,
Williams too.
sure.
So maybe it also has to do with the medium, because both Truman and Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams are also tied to film. What do you think?
I
And to
think that's
celebrities?
possible. But two European creators that come to mind are, again,
Mhm.
Pasolini, who is, of course, just a journalist and an essayist and a fiction writer and a filmmaker, and Jean Genet.
Mhm.
Genet was a lot like Burroughs, but he of course wrote in France, and I think that I think I can say that the French are a little bit more open-minded when it
Mhm.
comes to sort of difficult conversations and provocations than Americans. I think that American readers and viewers tend to get a little bit more offended more easily.
Yes.
And I think it's fair to say that. It's not a judgment, it's just an observation.
Definitely. I completely agree with you.
Yes. Thank you. And I guess we can advance to the next one. So here we finally come to a boy's own story. This is probably the most high profile project I've had a chance to work on yet. Edmund White, he's been writing since the mid 70s. He's really, like, I would say, the godfather of gay literature. He wrote this book, A Boy's Own Story, in 1982. It was his most popular and successful book. Susan Sontag famously blurbed it. They were good friends. So along with his husband, Michael Carroll, I co-adapted it into a graphic novel. It was illustrated by Igor Karash, who did the cover of my novel, Performa non grata. It examines gay oppression in the 1950s, liberation in the 1960s and 70s, and then devastation in the 1980s with the AIDS crisis. Now, A Boy's Own Story itself only takes place in the 50s, and it's semi-autobiographical. It's about Edmund White. It's part of a trilogy. The second part is The Beautiful Room is Empty. The third part is The Farewell Symphony. I wanted to go a little bit farther. It was my idea to extend the story beyond boyhood and to look at, because I know Edmund well, and because I've read a lot of his memoirs, I knew a good deal about his life into his 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And so I suggested to Michael and to Edmund and to Top Shelf that we extend the story out of the Midwest, because the story is Ohio and Michigan in the 1950s. I said, let's also go into New York and Paris in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Let's look at gay liberation. Let's look at the AIDS crisis. I want to look at the whole 20th century arc of the gay experience, from being in the closet and terrified in the 1950s to celebrating liberation in the 60s and 70s with Stonewall, to the decimation of our community in the 1980s and 90s with AIDS. So I feel it's become a much larger, more epic story, and I'm very proud of it. We got blurbs by Alison Bechdel, of course, who wrote Fun Home, and the Bechdel test, which of course students in women's studies and gender studies will know all about. John Irving, who wrote the Cider House Rules in the World According to Garp, A.M. Holmes, and Andre Aciman, who wrote Call Me by Your Name. They all gave us really wonderful blurbs. Harper's Magazine just gave us a 2-page spread, and the LGBTQ Nation just gave us a big feature. We're anticipating interviews with the New York Times, reviews in the Nation and the Atlantic. We're going to be on Sirius XM radio with Michelangelo Signorelli, which has like 8 million listeners. So it's going to get a ton of attention. It comes out on December 20th. So I'm very, very proud and excited. Do you have any questions about
Well,
this one?
congratulations, and we'll all be buying a copy of the book, definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Of course.
You could advance. So Culture Connection through the Queens Public Library is a show that I host 2 or 3 times a month. It's funded through the Queens Public Library through grants, and I get to interview writers and filmmakers and musicians and journalists, sometimes dancers and actors and designers. We'll be interviewing Rose McGowan, the actress, in 2 weeks, Joyce Carol Oates in January, Linus Roach in February. We just interviewed Ken Oleta, who wrote a big book about Harvey Weinstein. We've interviewed Andre Aciman, Omar Sharif Jr., Diane Seuss, Jonas Poher Rasmussen, who just got nominated for 3 Academy Awards for his beautiful documentary, Flea. The designer Ralph Rucci, Brian Broom, A.M. Holmes is in early December. And it's just been kind of a gift that I get to, watch all these films and read all these books and then interview these great minds 2 or 3 times a month. It's probably one of the happiest steady jobs I've had. And I'll have a show this Friday, actually. I'll be interviewing Damian Lewis, who wrote a book about Josephine Baker, because she was part of the French resistance. A lot of people don't know this, but she was a spy for France and Britain against the Nazis during World War II. So he wrote this great book called Agent Josephine, and that will be this Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Well, congratulations. I especially enjoyed the webinar that you gave on Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams, needless to say.
Yeah, Lisa.
But you knew that I was going to reference that.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that was great. And if you actually advance it, I could show you some stills. So these are just some stills of my interviews. They're similar to Zoom. We use a Yardstream. So it's just me and the guests. And there's Ken Oleta. There's David Santos Donaldson, who wrote The Great Greenland. There's Diane Seuss, who won the Pulitzer this year. There's Ava Cherry, who was a backup singer for David Bowie as Edmund White. And then there's Omar Sharif Jr. and Andre Aciman. And just to give you a sense of the format, it's similar to what we're doing here.
Definitely. Going to move to the next one.
Sure. So my background actually is not necessarily in literature. My bachelor's degree is in media. I went to the New York Institute of Technology, and my master's is in clinical psychology from Columbia University. I taught introduction to psychology at the high school level for 10 years. I've worked closely with at-risk youth in specialized high schools. I taught human sexuality, psychology of gender, developmental psychology, and psychology 101 at the college level for 2 years. And I did practice for a short time as a psychotherapist and a case manager. I currently actually have a full-time day job as a regional director of quality assurance for Delaware, New Jersey, and Kentucky in the area of support coordination for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So in my mind, there's always been a very close relationship between psychology and education and film and literature. They all occupy the same space. And I think that goes back to my interest in dissection, and that's what interviews give me as well. The Culture Connection series, for example, it allows me to dissect a book or dissect a film. The same way I would dissect a subject or a psyche.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. And let me just see. Oh, your illustrations are just incredible.
Thank you. Yeah,
I always like them the most.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'm also an artist. I mean, mostly amateur. I do it for myself for fun. I've had a few shows in New York, Tucson, California. The portrait of William S. Burroughs that I illustrated was the cover of Fever Spores. There was a drawing that I did that ended up on a wine bottle that was being auctioned for breast cancer awareness in Irvine, California. So these are just some pieces that I've done. Some of them are portraits of people I know. Others are just things that are in my mind. I think there's another set of illustrations as well. If you advance it. Yeah, and this is the next collection of drawings that I had done. And oftentimes drawing helps me overcome writer's block. If I'm sort of stuck, I just draw for a couple of hours, and it helps me gain clarity into the story that I want to tell. They complement each other. Did you have any questions about any of these? Oh, so that one drawing to my left, one with the mask, the KN95 mask, that was in
I
my
was about to
response.
ask about that one.
Yeah, it was in response to COVID-19. Do you have any questions about any of the others?
Well, it seems to me that this could be both drawings or engravings for the technique that appears on screen. And at times it is really difficult to tell. I would say that the only reason why I would know that these were drawings is because of the use of color, unless you specifically painted after you did engraving on paper.
That's interesting. Yeah, people have said that my drawings have like an engraving quality, and I think it's because I do when I ink, it's very thick. I like very thick, bold lines. It allows for, I think, the drawings to pop, and the color is all color pencil. I use a lot of color pencil.
Oh, so these would not be acrylics?
No, it's not acrylics. I started to use
this is pencil.
Pencil, yeah. I started to use watercolors recently, but none of these are watercolors. I didn't include those yet.
Well, I especially like the drawing, needless to say, that you did of Fran Lebowitz. So, but also the one on the left. Those would be my two very favorites.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm proud of those.
Let me see. Well, it seemed that we concluded the PowerPoint. This is really very interesting. You truly have an activity that covers pretty much both the visual arts and writing. So I wanted to ask, as a way to open the Q&A, and by the way, for those of you in attendance who would like to ask questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A section. So that I can have questions that I can read to Brian. So I wanted to ask, you mentioned briefly about your next projects, the Edmund White's adaptation. And so I wanted to ask, what are your next projects at this point?
So after The Boy's Own Story in December and Performer Non Grata in April, I have another novel that I just finished, which probably won't be out until 2024. because I just finished it. So of course it has to go through the editing process, and we have
So a
to find
second novel, because you have one in 2023 and this would be the second one, right?
This would actually be the third, because my
Oh,
first was
wow.
yeah,
Well,
my
that's
first
great.
was thank you. My first was the Unmentionable Man, which was published in 2015. Um, so it'll be my third. And then I also wrote a screenplay. I can't talk about it just yet because I don't want to jinx it. But it's
Mhm.
something that's complete, and a pretty prominent producer has taken an interest in it, and we're developing it together. We're currently revising. So, hopefully both of those projects will be out in 2025 or 2026. And there's also another graphic novel script that I wrote, and an illustrator is attached, and now we're just looking for a publisher. So I guess beyond the two projects that are coming out in December and April, I have three more for 2024 to 2025. So hopefully people don't get too sick of me. I have
Well, of course not. And I'm hoping to have you back here for another good
yeah,
presentation of maybe
anytime.
your book on white.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to.
Wonderful. So we have a question from Ethan. Ethan is asking, when did you first start drawing?
I started drawing as a kid, in grade school. I mean, I drew a cherub, a little angel, when I was 6 years old, and my teacher saw it and gave me a lot of encouragement. And she asked me to enter it into a contest, and I won first place. And I was only in first grade. I was 6 years old, and I was like, "Oh, this is fun. I enjoy doing it. People seem to like it." And I guess I started then, and then I stopped for a while and started again when I was about 18 or 19. And that's when I started this style with the stippling and the pointillism and the very thick bold lines. So I guess in earnest since I was 18, and now I'm 45. So it's been quite a while, 27 years.
Well, are there any other questions?
I guess we were very thorough.
I think we were, and I have a question. Actually, there's another question. So, 1 second, because I have to figure out. Oh, here it is. How do you navigate having a full-time job and engaging in all those creative fields? That would be one question. And the second question would be, which has been your most rewarding endeavor?
Well,
These questions are from Sarah.
I guess it's because my job is completely remote, so I get to work from home.
Mhm.
And there's sometimes downtime in between tasks. So I will, jot down an idea, or I'll work a little bit on a drawing. But then also I'm very strict and structured about saving at least 1 or 2 hours a day every day after work. Usually I'm done with work by 5, and then I'll make dinner and eat. And then from 6 to 7 or 6 to 8, I'll write or draw. And then by 8 o'clock, I'm exhausted. So all I can do is watch TV. But I'm very strict about leaving at least 1 to 2 hours for creative work every day. Even if it's during my lunch break, if I take an hour for lunch, I usually fill that time with something creative, and I'll draw or write or edit while I'm eating. And then of course, weekends, I'll give myself 2 or 3 hours in the morning before I start my day. And then the other question, I'm sorry, what was the other one?
There was one question, and the other question was about basically incorporating the creativity into your life, which you also pretty much answered.
Yes, I think so.
And we have another question from Jeremy, who's asking, what would you say are very challenging parts of your job?
Of my day job or of my creative work?
I would imagine both.
Um, I guess it's that balance. It's trying to find the balance. There are only so many hours in the day. And if I'm going to give myself credit for one thing, it's that I'm good at time management. And if I
That's
wasn't,
wonderful.
yeah, if I wasn't, I wouldn't be able to get any of this done. The only reason I'm able to get so much done and keep a job is because I'm very structured and strict about scheduling. I'm a very big fan of scheduling and blocking things out. I think it's because I went to college and then graduate school, and your life is ruled by schedules and time management, especially in graduate school, as you know, Victoria,
Oh
because
my
there's so
goodness,
so
yes.
much reading and writing, and you have to be very disciplined. And I like the idea of breaking up my day. For 2 hours I will do this, for 3 hours I will do that, for 1 hour I will do this. So I have to say time management and scheduling. That's my secret weapon.
And actually, to follow up on another question slash comment, I am personally very interested in the habits of other writers. And this is something that Fran Lebowitz also said.
Mhm.
She is someone who asks people how they write. And I have noticed among American writers this obsession with word count. Like, oh, I write 10,000 words a day, or something like that. And Fran Lebowitz was mentioning that somebody mentioned to her an outrageous word count, and she felt really bad. And then that writer told her, no, but don't worry, I actually throw away 90% of it at the end of the day as well. So, and that really made her feel better. But I feel that there is this need of organizing, because also writing, in my personal opinion, is not exactly the most natural activity to sit
Mm.
down and write, especially research. Because it's both creative but also based on facts. So
Mhm.
it is that kind of balance. So I really think that it is important to have that type of mental structure to do this.
Yeah,
2
I
hours
agree.
a day I write, 1 hour I draw.
And I think
What do you
also a
think?
lot, I think that's right. And I think that a lot of my ideas as a writer come to me passively throughout the course of the day. And I'll jot down notes, in my iPhone. I'll just write down notes, and then I'll know what I'm going to when I sit down later, exactly what I'm going to be developing, what ideas I'll be developing, or which scenes I'll be uh, fleshing out. So it's not like I necessarily sit down not knowing what I'm going to do. I've done a ton of pre-writing passively throughout the course of the day, and I'll have notes to expound upon by the time I sit down. So, and you could easily jot down notes in between activities as they
Oh my
occur to you.
goodness, I have seen people like open their bag or move their hand to a recording device and be like, idea for writing.
Yeah.
I've just seen this person enter this coffee house and they look really weird. Tuck, and
I would
finish
be,
recording. So the recording device is actually creepy, in my opinion.
yeah, I would be too self-conscious to do that. I'm much more comfortable just writing it down.
Yes. Absolutely. Those people with the recording devices, in my opinion, are too organized, even
Yeah,
to be allowed to be writers,
that's too intense for me. I'm not comfortable with that.
Just to organize the batteries would be too much for me.
Yeah, for sure. Same here.
So basically, you have quite a lively writing agenda at this point. And we have another question. Let
Mhm.
me see. That came through the chat. So the question is from Sarah. Do you have a bucket list of collaborators with whom you'd like to work?
Oh my God.
For
Yeah.
instance, Sarah was mentioning that is mentioning that Edoardo Ballerini is the son of her former professor from UCLA.
Luigi. That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean,
Oh,
I've
really?
interviewed,
Luigi
yeah,
Ballerini? Really?
yeah,
I have never made the connection between the two
yeah.
Ballerini. And of course, I know Luigi Ballerini too, because he's a poet, a contemporary
Eduardo,
Italian poet, and a very
Eduardo's great.
successful one, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And Eduardo's wonderful. He just narrated Quentin Tarantino's new book, Cinema Speculation, and the Cormac McCarthy's new book, The Passenger. And he's starring in a new movie this series this spring for Hulu called Retreat. So he's working like crazy, and I've interviewed him for Culture Connection 3 times, and he
Wow.
very graciously read a chapter from my read and recorded a chapter from my novel Performa non grata that I will send to some
Mm-hmm.
publications in the spring. Hopefully, they could put it on their website. I don't know, maybe the New York Times or something if I'm lucky. But yeah, there's so many collaborators. There's so many people that I would love to work with. I have fantasies of like David Lynch or David Cronenberg, or Michael Haneke or Lars von Trier, or like Claire Denis, or my God, there's so many so many filmmakers, who I would love to collaborate with as a writer. And then, writers, I don't know how I would collaborate with a writer unless we co-wrote a book, but there are still a lot of great writers I would love to interview. Salman Rushdie, of course, being one of them, Mary Gateskill, Joyce Carol Oates, I get to interview in January. She's one of my heroes. So I've been very lucky that if I can't collaborate with them, I could at least interview them.
Well, you certainly have mastered the art of interview, because your conversations are very informative, very narrative, and also very engaging.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you so much.
So you think that you will continue interviewing writers, filmmakers?
Oh, for sure. I love that job. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, David Lynch is probably what I think of when I think of American film.
Oh God, yeah, he's probably one of our best, one of our best living.
I used to think that there were metropolitan cities, and then everything else in America was Twin Peaks.
well, sort of, on some level. That's
yes,
funny.
absolutely.
Like
Even
that.
some small cities in Pennsylvania or on the East Coast are a little bit a la Twin Peaks, if you see what I mean.
He really captured something, honestly, in looking at the American suburb.
And I remember reading that apparently Queen Elizabeth at some point had some formal engagement, but she didn't go to a concert because she had to watch an episode of Twin Peaks on TV.
I just read about that.
You also read that?
Yeah, I love that.
Me too.
That's so great.
So
it shows you the power of really wonderful storytelling,
Mm-hmm. Although in David Lynch, I must say that the story really takes on a poetics of its own.
Oh, his work for sure. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
it's really special.
He launches the idea and then it moves on its own. I think that one of my favorite films would be Elephant Man.
One of my favorite films of the 21st century, if not my number one favorite, is probably Mulholland Drive, which is his, of course. It captures so much in that film. And it's probably one of the most American stories I've ever seen too, for better or for worse.
Well, I'm not a David Lynch scholar, but I do appreciate his productions, I must say. So
yeah, he's wonderful.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us today?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you, so much, Victoria, for inviting me to give this talk.
Well, I thank you also for being here today and for telling us everything you've done and mentioning your future projects and just giving us your point of view on literature, literary theory, and film. It is always great to be able to engage with public intellectuals like you are, Brian.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very flattering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I'm going to close the meeting. Have a great day, everyone. And thank you again, Brian. It was a pleasure having you here today.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.